All right, welcome back, Chelsea fans, to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. We'll call this the Civil War edition, although I don't know, man. We need to find some new branding for this. This is a Matt Law special, back from another international break, and trying to make sense of Chelsea just not willing to quit a news cycle. Before we dive into this one, I just want to say this up top because I think we're going to likely cover this story quite a bit over the next however long. I get that the Chelsea Civil War story is entertaining to people. I understand that, to frame one party against another is a very simple and pedantic way to do this. I'm personally not that interested in that. I am really interested as to how it impacts supporters, who have been through a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, how it impacts supporters who regularly go to Chelsea despite cost of living crisis, for those of us internationally who have spent a ton of money to support the club over the last handful of years, and the never-ending news cycles that have been a part of this club during both the previous administrations and the new administration's beginning. So I am taking the angle of the supporter throughout this episode, and I'm sure future episodes. And I want to make that clear because, Matt, as we dive into this one, happy international break, and two, I'm just not as frankly as enthralled with this story as I think maybe some in the press seem to be. Is that a fair assessment? Do you get that from supporters? Is that like an angle that is understandable anyway?
Look, I think it's a big story. I've got to be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
You've got co-owners who are, if they're not at war, it's heading that way. And something has become public that I think in private a lot of people had heard things about and always thought that every effort would be done to be kept in private and kept away from the public eye. And now the first Bloomberg report sort of pulled the pin out of the grenade. And there have been stories since. I've written stories since, and the story's moved on a little bit from that first Bloomberg report. And it's an important story. It's going to be, the future ownership of this club once again. And you're right to take the supporters angle because, I was thinking about it the other day. This is a fan base who's been through everything that happened after Russia invaded Ukraine and the restrictions that were put on the club. Before that, even actually with the Super League stuff, you can probably chart, this sort of merry-go-round circus at Chelsea. Chelsea's always been newsworthy, and there's always been a sense of chaos around Chelsea, and I've loved that. A lot of the time, it's kind of good chaos with the results on the pitch and everything, and we've all bought into that. That's why I enjoy writing about Chelsea and covering Chelsea. But ever since really the Super League, there's been a kind of non-stop circus world that hasn't been enjoyable, and that's obviously taken in the restrictions, the takeover that obviously, for a takeover, didn't drag on too long, but we were all very tired of it in the end. And then the last 2 years of this ownership, which, frankly hasn't gone well yet, and there's been an awful lot of change with it. And now we're at a point where it almost feels like we're in a takeover cycle again, because the ownership structure, it's clear, has to change.
Yeah, and look, I think what I meant when with my little intro to this episode is that I know it's a big story. It obviously is a big story. It will fundamentally change the way the club is run in some direction, right? What I don't love is like the soap opera around it, because I think a lot of supporters are in a really tough position here. Who, they already went through one ownership acquisition, and we're not looking to go through another less than 2 years later.
And the last ownership acquisition did turn into a beauty contest, didn't it? It was because the club was effectively put up for auction, which had never really happened in English football before because of the nature of it. It became a beauty contest that was played out in public, and this already feels like we're heading down a bit of a beauty contest road again, with certain parties trying to look better than the other party. And I get that in a way, but I also get that that's bad for supporters and B, bad for the club. Um, and, you know, my profession is reporting on it, so I can't be too hypocritical and say, oh, I don't like it and all that, because it provides me with a living and a wage and it keeps me in stories. But I completely recognise that it's difficult for fans, and also it's not healthy for the club.
Yeah, I think before we dive into this one, please, this is going to be a big episode. We're going to talk through a lot. If you have a Chelsea curious friend or someone who's just following this story, please share this with them. Matt's done a lot of reporting on this, or have been a ton out there who have done reporting. So just credit to them and their journalistic skills on this one. Thanks to the amazing community. 5 stars, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, very, very helpful for us. Subscribe on YouTube, incredibly helpful. Join the conversation Discord. It is buzzing in there with this story, and sign up for the dispatch. I am more than sure that Sam will be covering this topic as an email newsletter soon. But we're going to dive straight into this one, and just a little scene setting before we go to our first break here, Matt. You know, like I kind of wanted to go back to the beginning here, right? Because this may be an ownership group where it feels longer than it actually has been. You know, this is in May 2022 that Bowley and Clear Lake win the chance to become Chelsea's ownership group. Clear Lake have a 61.5% stake, roughly. Bowley and Co. have a 38.5% stake. You know, and talking to Dan and to a lot of supporters, and just thinking back to these moments, right? Most supporters at the time, it felt like, were supportive of, you know, of Bowley and Clear Lake, of the options that they had at their disposal. It seemed like they were the most competent, well-run group with a plan. And I was just thinking back to what it felt like in May, after this like 3-month period of, you know, kind of turbulence, that we settled with a group that, you know, had sporting experience, that said all the right things, that wanted to, you know, take over custody, right, of this club, and know that it's not something that you really own. It's something that you manage until the next group. And I just think back to that moment, and it's so odd to be where we are now from where we were just 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, and look, it's difficult to sort of sum up in very short terms of how it's got there. There are some very deep-rooted differences and problems that have come up. I mean, at the end of the day, what seems to have happened is, look, I'm told that before the Chelsea takeover, Clear Lake and Todd's relationship started when one of his businesses, Eldridge, put a business up for sale. I think it's called CBAM Partners. I'm going to check that on my phone as I talk to you. Yeah, it was called CBAM Partners, which is a credit manager that Clear Lake tried to buy. Now, actually, that company was sold to a different company. Clear Lake didn't manage to buy it, but a bromance formed between Todd Bowley and Bedad Iqbali and Jose Feliciano that led to talks around other opportunities that they could maybe have together. But, and I may end up being stand corrected on this, but this is what I'm told, and this is what I read and I believe, they'd never actually properly done any business together. There was this acquisition that didn't go through. And I think now, unfortunately for Chelsea, we're seeing the result of two people who'd never actually properly worked together. They'd struck up a friendship and a bromance and respected one another's work, but hadn't properly worked together. They hadn't managed together. And over time, it's become clear that they have two very, very different ways and theories in management. And unfortunately, Chelsea have been caught in the middle of that now, because they've certainly, from the Bowley perspective, which was made clear on Saturday morning in the piece that I read, they believe that side believes they can't work with the other anymore. The other side say that the relationship can remain professional, but from Bowley's perspective and Bowley's team perspective, they're really done with working with Clear Lake.
And we'll get to that in our second segment. The you know, kind of I'm calling it the Great Divide, but I think, just again contextually, I think painting a picture for those who have maybe forgotten. Bully said after the acquisition was complete, "We're honored to become the new custodians of Chelsea Football Club. We're all in 100% every minute, every match. Our vision of as owners is clear. We want to make the fans proud, along with our commitment to developing the youth squad, acquiring the best talent. Our plan of action is to invest in the club for the long term and build on Chelsea's remarkable history of success. I personally want to thank the ministers and officials of the British government and the Premier League for working to make this happen. Our view, though, was that in the long term, this is a long term project, and we're committed to the long term." He's also said, "We very much believe that we're going to figure it out. This is the last couple of years. We've got the best league in the world. We've got what I think is the top city in the world. We've got an unbelievable location, the top city in the world. There's a market for players in every country in the world. Each one of those markets is different." I think speaking of the multi-club model, he also called for patience. In April, he said we just need to let the process develop, give them time to go from being unbelievable individual players with great skills to fold into a team. And then there's the famous quote from Badad, who thought, "We thought Chelsea was frankly an asset, a business that was not terribly well managed on the football side, sporting side, or promotional side. So we have a meaningful opportunity at the club, and we'll get to it. For us, we need to be the beachhead that look to the multi-club model. We think European sports is probably 20 years behind U.S. sports in terms of sophistication on the commercial side and sophistication on the data side, global assets, global audiences, yada yada yada." So, Matt, I was kind of thinking about, like, that's the context. That's what they said, right? In their own words, both parties, they painted this unified vision. I just thought about what they have achieved versus what they haven't achieved, and maybe you can add to this list in either fashion. What they've achieved so far. Let's be kind to start. I think the women's team continued, success over the last couple of
Yeah.
years. They have invested in that team significantly, and I think that is a fair enough point. They've also created a new sporting structure for that side, to look for additional investment to make it feel separate
Yeah.
and different from the men's side, which is interesting. They have achieved some significant financial gamesmanship, which has just been fantastic to watch from the outside. They have, whether you love it or not, they've thought about entertainment as a kind of a core pillar of what they want to do at Chelsea. Different
Yeah.
promotional things and DJs and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I know there are a lot of people who don't love that, but that is something they've achieved. And then overall, it looks like they have, from the outside, lowered the wage bill. Is there anything else you'd put into the achieved bucket?
It's difficult.
Yeah, I know. I wrote.
It's really difficult. Look, I think they would now argue, and we talked about this last week, that they continue to achieve building a team of people and employees that can work successfully together and carry out things as a team, and that they've put more of a structure in place. They always argued that the club they took over, because of the way it was run by Roman Abramovich and only a few very close people to him, they didn't think that was sustainable in the level of business that Chelsea. And you might not agree with that, but I think they would argue, and even though there have been quite a lot of changes along the way, I think they argue that that's part of building this team. So I think they would claim that off the pitch, in terms of personnel, they are healthier, but I know a lot of people would push against that. It's difficult. I've got to be honest, it's difficult to add too much to what you've said.
Yeah, I would also just give them credit for lowering the average age of the squad, if we want to go that way. I think on the men's side, like they have done that. They've acquired some top young talent for sure. I think under the not achieved, many transfers have not been hits. I think that's incredibly fair to say. There have been some incredible misses. There's been no success of any sort on the men's side. Commercial success, certainly not. That's been probably the most surprising thing of everything, is that they haven't been able to get their arms wrapped around how to make this successful commercially. The youth setup, I think, is worse off for not having Neil Bath and co. Than it was previously, and I think that's a big loss. And then one of the big things, which we will get to in our next section, Matt, is new stadium progress.
Yeah,
there was a lot of buzz around this when they were first made to be the owners, and just hasn't been any movement there. So that I wanted to do a little bit of framing up front, right? this is what they came in to do. This is what they said they were going to do. This is what they've actually done. We'll go to ad break really quick and then come back. And then Matt will kind of unveil the story as it has become known over the last few days. So thanks to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, Matt. I'm just going to, kind of tee this one up, and we, kind of post your framing in the first section, which is maybe they hadn't done business together and they don't know how to do business together. What the hell has happened here? Is it ego? Is it sporting differences? Like, what's causing this, and what's causing it to happen now?
Well, what's causing this is basically you've got three, because you've got to say, I know a lot of people focus on Todd and Bedard, but we're really talking Todd, Bedard, and Jose Feliciano, who are the co-controlling owners. You've got three billionaires, incredibly successful guys in their own fields, of having run things a certain way with their own ideas. And it's just clashed. And I've got to say, when you look at ownerships, there's a lot of examples of when duos have come together, Hicks and Gillette. If you go back even further, Sugar and Venables. If you go back in Chelsea history, obviously Ken Bates and Matthew Harding. This isn't a new thing that incredibly successful, wealthy people who have made their wealth and made their success doing things one way can't accept doing it another way. And that's kind of what it just boils down to be quite honest with you. And I know it's easy to be wise after the event. I say after the event, when it's come to a head. But there was probably, after about 6 months, a sense that it could come to this. I just didn't expect it to come this quickly. I thought that maybe
after 6 months?
After 6 months, you could see there were key differences and key gaps. And I think I wouldn't be the only person who heard stories behind the scenes. And I think that is, but we're talking levels here. We're talking levels of, things build up and things get worse. But they pointed in a direction where I think you thought maybe in 5 years' time, both these guys aren't going to survive. This is either going to be Clear Lake Chelsea or it's going to be Todd Bowley Chelsea. Now, that has accelerated, and it's accelerated way faster than I expected it to. And we're here now because, like I say, someone somewhere decided to take the pin out of the grenade and make it public. With the Bloomberg piece didn't lay out everything in factual detail. I think there was a lot of speculation and a lot left unsaid within the Bloomberg piece. But what the Bloomberg piece did was bring the genie out of the bottle. And then you'll have seen how quickly, Saturday morning, I had the piece that Bowley now believes the relationship's dead, that he feels he can get backers. We've seen a lot from the Clear Lake side. Clear Lake obviously insistent that they won't sell, but would like to buy the Bowley stake and even the Hans Jorgwis and the Mark Walter stake, and they have capital ready to do that, so they say. So the fact it escalated so quickly shows you that this story was kind of ready to go, and it needed someone to pull the pin. I thought people would do everything they can not to pull the pin, but someone somewhere has decided to bring this to a head, because now the position it's in, it has to have a resolution. It cannot just go on. It has to have a resolution. Now, I'm not saying that'll be a quick resolution. In fact, I'd be amazed if it is a quick resolution, because everyone's saying they don't want to sell. But there has to be a resolution, and this is what this is aimed at doing, bringing everything to a head so that whether it be in 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, we are sat here with a resolution, and there is probably a single owner or a single ownership group of Chelsea.
If I am to play devil's advocate, I think working relationship and some bruised egos aside, if neither party decides that they want to sell their stake to the other party, doesn't nothing happen? Like,
well, yeah,
aren't we in the same spot? Because
nothing happens because it's a status quo. But for instance, I don't think. Todd Bowley certainly has no intention of giving up his chairmanship early. I wrote that piece a while ago about it swaps every 5 years. That's in a contract. So I don't even think you could have a vote of no confidence from one side to try and get him out as chairman. So really, if nobody sells, they are stuck. But the fact that someone, and I don't know who, I promise I don't know who, but it must have come from one side of the ownership or the other side of the ownership. The fact that someone decided to take the pin out the grenade would suggest that somebody will blink. So even if they say it's not for sale, it's not for sale, somebody, one side will eventually blink and think, well, we did want to buy it, but we can't, and therefore our only other option here is to get out because we are not being part of this anymore.
Yeah. So and let's frame part of the reason why I did the first section the way that I did it is because, as you stated earlier, it's not been a good go, right? There's not much has gone incredibly well for their 2.5 to 4.5 billion dollar investment in Chelsea Football Club. Obviously, there's I think roughly 2 billion set aside for future investment in the project over the 10 years that they're minimum committed to the management of Chelsea, right? I mean, this is the terms of this are pretty clear in what they signed up for. You had like the multiple reporting, you're reporting, Sam's reporting, New York Times did reporting. Bowley's considering how he can, put together the funds. Clear Lake manages 80 some odd billion in assets already, is confident they can get the funds. Both sides seem relatively assured that if they were to be the single ownership group, that they have the funds to do that. Do you know of any more detail on what that would look like for either side? Because it's a little confusing to me, honestly.
It's difficult because nobody really wants to talk in any detail. I mean, for instance, Clear Lake Capital is what they call committed capital, and they, as you say, they manage funds up to 80 billion or something, and they will tell you that the money is there. If Todd Bowley's side turned around tomorrow and said, "Do you know what, guys, we'll sell. We want out now." The money, they say, Clear Lake, and I have to take their word for it, is there to do it. They don't have to go and look for investors. They don't have to go and ask people to put more money in. They don't have to ask the fund they manage to suddenly up their investment. They can do it through investments already within Clear Lake through committed capital, and the money is there to do it. Todd's side's ownership is a bit different because that is their own money and it's split into 3 different stakes to make up the 38.5. But they say, and they are confident, that they can find the backing and have the backing to be able to make a bid that would be attractive to Clear Lake and offer them a profit, even though Clear Lake are insistent they will not sell. And I should say Todd Bowley's side at this point say they will not sell. But somebody's got to make a bid that they believe is attractive and offers the other one a profit. But they would have to. I'm not saying this is good, bad, indifferent, worse than the other, better than the other. They would have to do it through finding investment from others. So they would have people or companies basically give them more money to make a bid, and for them to make a bid that would offer Clear Lake capital on their investment, because they're obviously the major shareholder, it would have to be roughly circa 2.5 billion. And Clear Lake, if they're good to their word, would still turn around and say no to that. Similarly, Clear Lake to offer the Bowley side of Bowley, Walter and Viss a profit on their investment would probably have to offer about 1.5 billion. And they say they would reject that. But Clear Lake can use money that's already there and that they already have. Bowley's side would be money from investors, but they are adamant they have those investors and backers. I think both sides would probably put some doubt onto each other's claims, but I don't know the facts, so I can only present what they both say, really, or they're both of their positions.
So yeah, I mean, obviously, as the minority shareholder, Bully and Co. are at a slight disadvantage here, right? They'd have to raise slightly more money, and I use the word slightly.
We're talking, $1 billion more money.
We're talking billions here, so whatever. It's all make believe money anyway. They're gonna have to raise more money, period, right? To buy out the other side. I think on the other side, though, if you're Clear Lake, that money's tied up in returns, right? Where I think Bowley's advantage is that this is personal funds. Of course, they want to see a return, but it's different when you are
Yeah.
accountable to shareholders in a way, and so
All I would
it's
say to
unique.
that, I've seen some of that, and I get why people are saying that. All I would say to that is, and I'm talking legally here, purely legally, um, the Clear Lake Fund managed by Bedad Iqbali and Jose E. Feliciano, and this is an important point, I feel, is a discretionary fund whereby the investors invested into this fund and signed the management to Bedad Iqbali and Jose Feliciano of Clear Lake, and there is a time commitment in that where Bedad Iqbali and Feliciano contractually manage that fund for. It's at least 10 years. It might be 10 years, it might be 12 years, but it's around that amount of time. So for that amount of time, to try and put it into layman's terms, Bedad Iqbali and Jose Feliciano manage that fund. They can accept or reject bids on behalf of that fund. It's not a public company. It doesn't have to go to a vote or a proxy. They don't have to take it to their shareholders for approval. They manage it. It is their decision. So, whilst Clear Lake have lots of different investments, and how they manage one investment may impact the confidence people have in their other investments, in terms of this Chelsea fund, they are in charge of their own destiny. Certainly legally, they are. So it's not that different. If the Bowley side make a bid to Clear Lake for their stake, legally, Bedad Iqbali and Jose Feliciano can just say no or can just say yes without having to take it to the fund. They don't have to. That's what they've signed up for on the management. Whether they do or not is different, because their style of management might be to take it to the fund, but legally they don't have to. In exactly the same way that if Clear Lake make a bid for, say, just Bowley's 13% stake or whatever it is, exactly, Bowley makes that decision himself. So the fund is different, but at the end of the day, there's only two men who really have to make a decision on that, and that's Bedad Iqbali and Jose Feliciano.
True. Yes, and that definitely wasn't saying that about the legal
No,
implications.
but I've seen a little bit on Twitter and social media about, oh well, if a bid goes in on Clear Lake, it will be the investors who have to decide, and Bedad Iqbali and Jose Feliciano don't get to decide. That's just not actually right.
Correct. I think more what I'm saying is that they are responsible to shareholders, whereas Bully is responsible to his personal wealth, right? And so, like,
and as I said, they have a responsibility on their other Clear Lake investments to
sure.
promote confidence and promote correct decisions. So yes.
Can we talk a little bit about the frustrations and like individual things that are happening here? There's been plenty of reporting, for example, that there's frustration from the Bully side that there has been a lack of progress on key strategic initiatives, and that there's frustration from the Clear Lake side that there's just a clash of styles in the way that they want to manage, and that even with Bully stepping back over the last 18 months, which has been well reported by you and others, that they can't seem to get on the same page. Like, can you talk a little bit about like the clash of styles here, because I think it's an important note.
The best look, I don't agree, and look, other people get other information, and I'm not doubting it. My information is that the Pochettino departure was not the straw that broke the camel's back, and that there's far more deep-rooted issues. And at the end of the day, one managerial change within a whole club and everything doesn't spark some sort of civil war. But what I would say is there's a good example in the Pochettino tenure of the difference between what's happening at the moment. And that came at the end of the tenure, when we'd heard for a long time before he went that there was going to be this end of season review. Led by the sporting directors, obviously Bedad Iqbali and Jose E. Feliciano were heavily involved in that review. And we were told time and time again by the club, not by Bedad Iqbali or Clear Lake or Todd Bowley, we were told by the club that there would be an end of season review and that everything would be reviewed. And that would be the point that people made a decision on Pochettino's future, and that nothing was going to be discussed before then. Then come the last game of the season, after I think it was a 2-1 win over Bournemouth or something, was it? Mm-hmm. Pochettino, in what proved to be his final game in charge, very happily said in the press conference that the previous night, Todd Bowley had taken him out for dinner. and he'd taken him out for dinner, and it was a very positive dinner. And we asked Pochettino, do you think that means you're staying? And he said, well, you don't tend to take people out for dinner who you're about to sack, but I don't know. And then Todd Boehly went home. Todd Boehly went back to America, whereas everybody else, certainly the two sporting directors and Badad Iqbali, spent the next few days in Cobham conducting that review without Todd Boehly. Now, Todd Boehly obviously can be available on video calls, technology these days. He doesn't have to be in the room. But I think that spoke very loudly to the difference in cultures, that one side seemed to be very committed to this very data-led review where they wanted to go through figures, they wanted to go through pieces of paper, they wanted to sit down and all discuss it and blah, blah, blah. And one guy, some might say in a slightly more old-fashioned way, just wanted to take the guy out for dinner and get a feel for the room, and didn't want to be sat pouring through reports and papers and things like that. And I think that was a really good indicator of their different styles at the moment. And then if you look back, Bowley's first transfer window that he was in charge of, fairly disastrous in retrospect, but
yep,
it was signings based on relationships. It was signings based on him taking advice from the manager. It was signings based on his feeling and his thoughts and opinions and feel. And he was going for dinner all over the place. And he was signing players, you might say, quite obvious as well, well-known players, the Koulibalys of this world. I'm talking about, obviously, Raheem, Aubameyang later in the window. There's all kind of obvious stuff. Since after that window, when that went wrong and he decided that wasn't for him and he wanted the sporting directors just to do it, and that's how he felt was best to do it, he recognised that he wasn't an expert at this and his skills hadn't translated particularly well. Well, the approach then has obviously changed much more away from the way he dealt with that window to a very different way that is far more in keeping, I think, with the Clearlake way. And again, that's a heavy indicator. But there are lots of other indicators throughout the club on all kinds of different levels, sporting and non-sporting, and yeah, and that's where we are.
Before we take our final ad break here and dive into the what's next of it, is there any chance for reconciliation here, do you think?
No.
Gone?
Look, they might have to uphold an unhappy marriage for a while, and I don't expect they may well get to a place where they can be respectful. I mean, it was pointed out in one report today that they shook hands before the Manchester City game, that they were both out of the first game of the season, Wow, they must be great mates. They shook hands. But, I don't expect them to walk into a room and sort of punch each other or anything like that. But I just don't see any coming back. And also, this is going to make it worse because they will see what's out there in the press. There's going to be more of it. People want the instability to go away. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot more of this. And it's only going to widen the divide and widen the cultural shift. And I know that this, in terms of a good, healthy working relationship between these guys, there's no way back.
All right, we're going to take our final ad break, come back to what's next, and then on to bigger and better things. So thanks to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, we just mentioned before the break that it seems as if at this stage, and again, we frame everything as in this stage, as we're recording this on September 10th, 2024. By September 15th, something may have changed significantly. We just don't know. That's kind of the way this thing works. So, is there anything in the Premier League rules? This was something I was interested in, Matt, because we know they're committed to the club for 10 years as a part of this acquisition. Is there anything in the Premier League rules that says that they can actually do this within the ownership group, or is there going to be some fight back from the league on pursuing some sort of change in the structure?
No, there won't be. I mean, there will be. It has to just get signed off still, but they've both separately passed fit and proper tests and all that. The only way it would become a sort of not even an issue, but something the Premier League would have to look at a bit closely, as if it was being sold. Obviously, a new majority shareholder was coming in, and that's not going to happen. You know, they both have blocking options as part of their contracts. They both have matching rights. Neither's going to allow the other one to sell to someone the other one doesn't know. So because they'll feel that, you know, that might not end up being beneficial to them. So short answer is no. You know, it's going to end up either Clearlake Chelsea or Todd Bowley Chelsea, and they've both passed the fit and proper test. And even if, you know, Todd Bowley is bringing in outside investment, as long as it's outside investment with him in charge of it shouldn't really cause a problem. I mean, I suppose you could start to say, well, if it was, what would happen if it was, say, Saudi investment? But then we're really talking sort of if buts and maybes, and I wouldn't want to make speculative guesses on that. But for where we are and what we know at the moment, no, the Premier League won't be concerned about it too much.
And you haven't heard as to where he would get that extra money quite yet, right? There hasn't been any reporting on that.
No. No. I mean, again, I've got to be careful not to speculate on stuff within a story like this. So the bottom line of it is no, I wouldn't know where he'd get that money. As I say, you know, both Clearlake and Todd Bowley would probably doubt respective claims of the ease of which they can come up with these funds, because in the real world, coming up with $1 billion, 1.5 billion, 2 billion, 2.5 billion, and having it free cash, someone might have it in tied up cash, having it free cash is a lot more difficult. But they both say they can. They would probably both doubt one another. I don't know the ins and outs of that, because there's no possible way I can.
What is in your mind, and you could speak in broad terms about this, what is in your mind the trigger point for something to happen? Is it simply a financial sum that is too much to turn down? Is it public pressure? Is it something else that would make this move even more quickly than it's already moved?
So a bid. I mean, there hasn't been a bid from either side for each other's stake yet, despite the talk. A bid would move it along, because if one side has a bid even if it gets rejected, that's the point at which they have to have a really, really careful think, and could bring things to a head. Is, are we going to make another bid? Is it worth it? Or do we give up at this point? Do we put our hands up and say, look, we made a bid. We wanted control of Chelsea. We couldn't get control of Chelsea, and therefore we're not being part of Chelsea. So a bid is the big factor now from either side. It doesn't matter that Clearlake are the majority stakeholder, or that Todd and his allies are minority. A bid from one side to the other side is going to be a big moment, even with them both saying they won't sell, because then after a bid they have to go away and make quite a big decision on that. We still haven't, as well. I mean, the Todd angle comes from the fact that him and his associates are Walter and Viss, and very much the word is that they would only operate as a package. So it is impossible, according to them, for Clearlake to just try and buy out Todd.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that Clearlake eventually won't try to do that. And again, that would leave quite a difficult decision, and a difficult decision not just for Todd, but also for Hans-Jörg Wyss and for Mark Walter. So, but a bid, so any sort of bid from any side, is the moment at which this starts to move along a little bit.
Do you have a sense of you know, because Clearlake has been in charge for the last 18 months and Todd was in charge for the first, 9 to 12 months, whatever it was. Do you have a sense of like what ownership would look like underneath the solidified control of either party? Is it more the same for Clearlake? Is it something radically different from Todd? Like, I'm just trying to get a picture here.
Yeah. Clearlake's probably easier to guess, because you wouldn't have any sort of new investment coming in. So Clearlake, I would imagine that either Badad Igbali or Jose Feliciano would become chairman and take the chairman role. The day-to-day running of the club wouldn't materially change very much, I don't think. Albeit, obviously, they don't need a third party signature to get decisions through. So, we might come around to the stadium, but it feels clear to me that there's been no progress on the stadium because both sides can't agree on something to both sign it off. That's a guess, but I'd say it's probably a pretty accurate guess and, fairly well reasoned guess. They've put the management committee together that they have. I think both sides are committed to that because they both signed it off, remember. And I think that, for instance, if Chris Jurasek had stayed, I couldn't have seen a world in which Todd Bowley's side took over and left a Clear Lake guy in chief executive. But there's now not a Clear Lake guy in chief executive. So I think in the short term, the management structure wouldn't change too much under either. Clear Lake would obviously have to nominate a new chairman, which would be Badad or Jose, I think. And Todd's side, I don't think would make huge personnel changes to start with, but I do think maybe we would see a different way of Chelsea being run slightly.
Yeah, I've seen supporters kind of frame this as like the heart and the head a little bit for Todd and Badad, which I don't know is accurate at all, but I've seen that framed. I think last thing, Matt, before we take off, is just the implications for supporters. Again, as we said at the beginning of the show, all of us as supporters have been through a hell of a lot over the last 4 or 5 years. This was unwelcome news to many within the supporters group, even with some of the dissatisfaction that currently exists within the supporter base, which is, I think, pretty well founded at this point. It feels like, once again, the little guy is caught in the middle, and I use the little guy as a collective here. How do you see the supporters reacting over however long it takes to get this done? Is there going to be,
look, I'll be honest,
rough environment?
I'm amazed, and I'm not trying to whip up a protest, but I'm amazed that the supporters have been as patient as they are to this point. If I'm honest with you, I've thought about scenarios in the past 6 months where we could have some protests outside the ground or have some sort of protests within the ground. And I know there's been the odd game of chanting, but there's not really been protests as such. I think the supporters deserve credit because I actually think they've been patient, and I think they've tried to support the club rather than turn on the club. And I credit Chelsea supporters for that. And I'm not just saying that because I cover Chelsea. I'm not that kind of person to do that. One of the best comments I saw on social media, and neither arm of the ownership will like me saying this if they listen to the pod, which I think they actually do. But it's aimed at both of them. The best comment I saw was, how can supporters trust owners who don't trust each other? And I thought that summed it up superbly. Whatever these owners say to supporters at the moment, they cannot expect the privilege of trust back when the supporters know that they do not trust each other, and they are going to have to work damn hard to earn that privilege back. And however much it might upset both arms of the owners, they don't deserve that trust at the moment. They simply have done nothing to deserve it, and they've got to earn it. And it's going to be whoever ends up winning this battle, it's going to be a long, they might feel like the victor when they win it, but it's even the winner's going to have a long road back with these fans to earn trust. And, they can look in the mirror on that because both sides can blame themselves for that.
Well, that's as much of a mic drop as we need at the end of this episode. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of go through the detail of this. And I think for the supporters groups out there internationally and within the UK, we just got to stay tough right now. And luckily we have some experience with this. So hopefully we can make it through. But look, please subscribe. Please make the work that we do, share it a little bit here. And until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.